I'm going to put us in the main room now.
Okay.
All right, so we are now live. Hello to everybody who is watching us via Zoom and also Facebook Live. Thank you for joining our webinar today on Igniting the Local Food Revolution in Your Community with Michael Brownlee and Lynette Marie Hanthorn. My name is Don Hall and I'll be your host. Before we get started, I just want to make a few quick announcements. First of all, this webinar is sponsored by Transition US. We are a national hub for the International Transition Towns movement, which is building local community resilience and self-reliance all over the world in over 1,000 initiatives in 50 countries. You can learn more about us, find a transition initiative near you, sign up for our e-newsletter, and donate to support programs such as this one at our website, transitionus.org. Next, I'd like to tell you about another upcoming event that you might be interested in. It is our Transition Launch online training, which will be starting on Thursday, March 29th and be running for 8 weeks through Thursday, May 17th, 2 p.m. to 3:30 Eastern Time, this same time here. And this Transition Launch online training is an online version of our most popular 2-day face-to-face training, Transition Launch, which gives you all the skills you need to set up and then run a transition initiative in your local community. We have 6 wonderful trainers, including the developer of transition training in the UK, Naresh Giangrande, and trainers from the US and Canada. So please, again, check out our website, transitionus.org, for more information about that. Finally, I'll explain a few things about this webinar format and platform. It will run for approximately 90 minutes, beginning with a presentation by our presenters, followed by Q&A. This webinar will be recorded and shared via Facebook Live. And the recording will be posted on our Transition US YouTube channel probably later today. To preserve sound quality, everyone except for our presenters and myself is currently muted, but you can submit a question at any time by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or the chat button at the bottom of your screen. For those that are out there in Facebook land, you can type a comment underneath the video. And when we go into the Q&A portion of this event, you will be able to click on Raise Hand and ask a question live on the air. We'll unmute you and turn on your video so you can ask a question to Michael and Lynette Marie directly. So without further ado, I'll turn this webinar over to Michael and Lynette Marie to talk about igniting the local food revolution in your community. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Much gratitude to Transition US and to Don Hall for hosting this webinar. We suspect that some of you tuning in attended Michael's presentation at the Transition US National Gathering in St. Paul last summer.
Which was a very poignant event for me because Lynette Marie and I, as some of you know, co-founded, along with Don Hall, the very first officially recognized transition initiative in North America just 10 years ago. And the work of the transition movement has been an essential part of our journey into the process of localization.
Our focus since 2005 has primarily been on localizing our food supply, starting with our work in Boulder County, Colorado, which is right on the front lines of the struggle between regenerative agriculture and industrial food and agriculture.
Working here in Boulder County has put us in a great position to be able to experiment and to learn a great deal along the way. Here, we've come to understand that reclaiming our food supply and our food sovereignty and our food justice is essential to all localization efforts. Food is the gateway issue.
But before we begin this webinar, let's just take a moment of stillness together to be present and open to what's truly needed.
Thank you. We're going to begin this webinar today with a very brief overview and assessment of the local food movement and our current food system in general.
Then we'll look at how food localization can emerge in a region as a naturally occurring process of course correction, healing, restoration, and regeneration.
We've never been able to understand all this as a process until now. So we'll be exploring the 7 stages of food localization.
Finally, we'll explore how you can emerge as a leader of the local food revolution in your community, utilizing the 7 steps that you must master.
To begin, we need to be very candid. You know, all across the country, people who are working on local food are beginning to encounter very significant challenges.
Essentially, they're hitting the wall and they're burning out. Many are on the verge of giving up.
You know, very few small farmers are able to make a living growing food for local consumption.
Entrepreneurs trying to build businesses based on local food are struggling. Many of them are failing and disappearing.
People in many communities are trying to build much needed local food infrastructures and increase local food production at the same time.
But are finding there is not enough money, not enough farmers, not enough labor, not enough land, not enough water, and not enough support.
This is getting hard, and it seems that no one really knows what to do.
The reality is that for all the progress we've seen in local food over the last decade or so, a dramatic increase in CSAs and farmers markets and greatly increased popularity and demand for local food, we haven't gotten very far in building local food systems.
You know, we've been impressed by the number of people who are working in local food who are utterly shocked when they hear just how little of the current food supply is actually local.
The state that's gotten much farther than anyone else with food localization is Vermont, who after at least 15 years of concerted effort has gotten to only about 8% local food.
8%. But the rest of the country isn't doing nearly as well as that. Most states are at less than 1% local food. Most of them probably far less than that.
The total retail and food service sales in the U.S. amounts to just over $5 trillion, almost a third of GDP.
Local food, which is generally recognized at around $15 billion a year, actually represents only about 0.3% of our total food supply in this country.
Here in Colorado, we were shocked to see that on the Locavore Index of States, which uses the best data available anywhere on local food, our state dropped from number 19 to number 35 over a period of a few years, during the time when we had been pouring our hearts out into this work.
So this agricultural state of Colorado is at number 33 in local food for 2017. And surprisingly, California is just a tiny bit ahead of us at number 28. These are really dismaying numbers.
Those of us who have been working in local food for a while are beginning to recognize that we feel a lot like the environmentalists and climate activists who,
Yeah.
despite their decades of effort, are witnessing global warming rapidly approach worst case scenarios.
Yeah, it's getting worse faster than almost anyone imagined. What we've been doing to prevent climate disaster is simply not working.
We could say almost the same thing when we look at what's happened to our food supply, which less than 100 years ago was basically 100% organic and 100% local.
That's right. What's happened is that our food supply, and we could say our democracy with it, has been stolen from us by an unholy alliance of multinational corporations in big ag, big food, big pharma, with the support of big oil and big banking and big government.
And that the resulting industrial food system created since World War II is having disastrous consequences on a global level, including being the primary contributor to global warming.
The primary contributor to global warming is the industrial food system. So this unholy alliance has essentially been stealing our future right before our eyes. And this is a reality that is largely unspoken and even unconscious in our society.
And it is in this context that the local food movement is struggling to get a toehold.
You know, it's no wonder that this work of food localization is so difficult. The unholy alliance controls more than 99% of our food supply and 99% of all our agricultural lands. And their unabashed goal is to control all 100%.
It's not that our food system is broken and that we must fix it. The industrial food system works exactly the way it was designed.
It's a very efficient machine for generating wealth for the 1/10% who are mostly nameless and faceless to us, and consolidating power among a handful of multinational corporations, which you could say are more powerful than in many of our governments.
All at the expense of human health and well-being, and at the expense of the health and well-being of our biosphere.
It's far from an exaggeration to say that the industrial food system is killing us and steadily destroying the biosphere and the planet's ability to support life.
We will never fix or change this industrial food system. Trying to do so is playing their game, and they are very good at what they do. They play to win.
But what we can do is to build an alternative, parallel food system, one that is highly localized, regional, resilient, and self-reliant.
A food system that gradually heals our relationship with the biosphere and begins to reverse the devastation that industrial civilization is causing.
A food system that restores human freedom and human sovereignty and is an active regenerative force in shaping the future of humanity and all life on this planet.
This will require nothing less than a revolution, a local food revolution.
Since 2005, Lynette Marie and I have been deeply involved in what has been called, sometimes disparagingly, the local food movement.
From the beginning, we've understood that in the face of converging global crises, it was becoming necessary for our communities to be able to meet their essential needs as locally as possible once again, if they were to have any possibility of being resilient and self-reliant.
So we set to work here, not fully knowing just how great the challenge was going to be, or really even understanding just how important it was that our work would ultimately be successful.
In the process, we've seen local food become very popular and very trendy, and certainly very expensive. at least compared to industrial food.
In the process, we've witnessed local food becoming seen essentially as a lifestyle movement for the economically privileged and the white.
In the process, people like us have often been accused of being elitist foodies.
And this is one of the underlying reasons why it's been so difficult to mobilize much support for the local food movement.
While lots of people were in favor of local food, that is, they weren't exactly opposed to it, we failed in communicating just how important it is to localize our food supply, even though we explained the health benefits of local food.
Even though we explained at length the economic benefits to communities.
And even though we pointed to the renaissance of community it created.
But it turned out that none of this was compelling. Local food was still seen as an optional lifestyle choice for those who could afford it. Something like very expensive exercise equipment or maybe high fashion clothing.
We can't tell you how frustrating this has been to our farmers who are dedicated to feeding their communities with the healthiest and most nutritious food available anywhere.
And many of those farmers have had to work full-time jobs off the farm in order to be able to produce such food for their communities.
They routinely take enormous risks, financial, social, and career-wise, in order to do this.
So the truth is, our communities have simply had no compelling reason for localizing the food supply. But that is about to change.
We now know and are just beginning to understand that global warming will have a devastating impact on the global food supply.
And this will happen far more rapidly than almost anyone is discussing, much less planning for.
You may have read recently about a rather obscure scientist based in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Irakli Loladze at Bryan College of Health Sciences.
Right, thanks. Who is quickly becoming famous for his study that shows that an increasing concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is rapidly destroying the nutritional value of food, including proteins. This is very important to understand.
But this is only part of the story of the devastating impact of global warming on food. At the University of Washington, the chair of the Atmospheric Sciences Department there, Dr. David Battisti, is perhaps the most important source of scientific framing for this, the first climate scientist we know of in the world who has done focused research on this.
Battisti demonstrates very dramatically that for each degree Celsius of average global warming, food production capacity will be diminished by 10%.
10% per degree. But Battisti says that even using the UN's very conservative and outdated IPCC projections, we could expect a 30 to 40% reduction in food production capacity by the end of this century. That's an absolute disaster.
And this impact is based solely on the direct effect of increased temperature and does not even include accompanying cumulative effects of things like increased pest and disease pressure, soil degradation and desertification, water scarcity, and catastrophic weather events.
Yeah.
Plus the reduced nutritional and protein levels in crops caused by excess CO2.
But based on Battisti's guideline of 10% reduction of food production capacity per degree Celsius of warming, we can start to grasp the enormity of the food predicament that we face.
Especially when we pay attention to those courageous and routinely marginalized climate scientists who quietly insist we are likely to see an increase of 4 to 6 degrees Celsius as soon as 2050, perhaps even before that.
We're facing nothing less than abrupt climate change.
Given that population increase is expected to drive demand for food by an additional 14% per decade,
Yeah.
we can see that we're facing widespread catastrophic famine in the not so distant future. We need to declare a global food emergency now.
Now, to put it simply, global food production capacity will be, see if I can find where I am here.
There.
Yeah, global food production capacity will be dramatically diminished over the next few decades. Food production will likely be cut in half over just the next 32 growing seasons. And that process has already begun, and it's becoming increasingly visible around the planet.
The areas hardest hit will be the breadbasket regions of the world, including the Midwest here in America, where industrial agriculture has been most tenaciously entrenched.
So while the industrial food system is already failing us even now, it soon faces outright collapse. It will not be able to adjust quickly enough. And since here in the US, we are dependent on this system for more than 99% of our food supply, well, the future of food is fairly easy to project.
Unless we quickly localize our food supply, famine will be rampant. Even here in the US, the first to suffer will, as always, be the economically oppressed.
Yeah.
But they will not be alone.
So the implication is clear that the local food movement must now rapidly shift into emergency mode. That's part of what we mean by a local food revolution, a radical acceleration and expansion in impact, effectiveness, and scale.
When we grasp the realities of our predicament, then we simply have no alternative but to quickly build our own local food supply. It must start right in our own communities, right where we live.
This must become the highest and most urgent priority of our communities. Our children's lives depend on us doing this.
We'll repeat that, for almost no one else is saying it yet. Quickly building our own local food supply must become the highest and most urgent priority of our communities. The alternative is unthinkable and totally unacceptable.
Yeah. So in the transition movement, we've always known that highly localized regional food sheds are where we've wanted to get to, where we could meet our essential food needs locally. This was the kind of future that we dreamed of and longed for.
But now we're beginning to understand that this is not just some ideal, but an urgent necessity. Yeah. And getting there will require a revolutionary effort.
So we wanted to take a few minutes now to describe how food localization unfolds in a region as a process of healing and restoration and regeneration, following deeply embedded patterns in the evolution of the universe itself.
All right. Stage 1 represents the status quo, dominated by the global industrial food system. Here, the region's foodshed effectively stretches across the globe with almost none of the food that people there consume being produced locally.
So in stage 1, nearly all the farmers and ranchers in the area are devoted to producing commodity crops, commodity livestock, all of it for export, almost all of it for export.
In stage 2, demand for local food begins to grow. What begins to emerge here is a community of eaters, people who are enlivened by the experience of local food and all that it represents.
In stage 3, production begins to grow to meet growing demand. producers and eaters and commercial food buyers alike begin to discover that the hunger for wholesome local food far exceeds supply.
Soon everyone discovers there is simply not enough non-industrial local food available to meet the growing demand.
So it's characteristic of stage 3 that demand for local food outstrips supply. Yet we often hear farmers react very strongly to this statement because they can't find a reliable market for what they produce.
At the same time, we know many commercial food buyers who are greatly frustrated because they would like to be able to offer much more local food to their customers, who are certainly asking for it.
You know, a few years ago, research in the food industry was released which indicated that more people were preferring local food than those who preferred organic. So this was a marker of a huge and unexpected trend.
There has been a great surge in demand for local food, but there is a huge gulf between supply and demand.
The reality is that there are essentially no markets for local food other than CSAs and farm stands and farmers markets and the handful of restaurants who feature local food.
Food hubs. Food hubs are an attempt to connect producers with buyers, but even food hubs are not skilled at creating markets. They could supply markets if they existed, but if they don't, then they are fighting an uphill battle.
Then in stage 4, which is the turning point in the entire process, we see obstacles and challenges abound. We see that those involved in the emerging regional foodshed begin to recognize that the local food movement cannot viably evolve in that region without radical systemic change on a much bigger scale. And this often seems a daunting prospect.
This stage will either result in a local food revolution, including the radical expansion of local food production and the building of a local food infrastructure, or this stage will give way to the complete success of the unholy alliance.
Most emerging food sheds in the US now are deep in the throes of the chaos and confusion of stage 4. And seeing this helps us to make sense out of what's happening in our community.
What will break the deadlock and entropy of stage 4 is communities making the commitment to localizing their food supply, most often expressed in terms of a goal, such as 30% local by 2025.
And until this collective will in a community reaches a kind of critical mass, things will just remain stuck and very frustrating.
When we're caught in the middle of stage 4, it often looks like the local food movement is failing, or that it's maybe just impossible to achieve any significant level of food localization.
I recently had a conversation with a dedicated local food producer and entrepreneur who's so frustrated and discouraged that he openly declares the local food movement is dead. And to many, it may appear that way.
The turning point is that moment of maximum entropy, that moment when it finally sinks in that there's no other choice but to localize the food supply.
So we say that if there's one central requirement for a regional food shed to ever emerge out of this tumultuous stage of stage 4, it's this: a significant number of participants in the effort must agree by consensus that the overriding project in which they're engaged is the localization of the region's food supply to the greatest extent possible in the shortest possible time.
They declare together that they shall localize the food supply, and they attach to this clear goals, perhaps 25% by 2030. Arriving at this consensus represents the ignition of the local food revolution in this region.
This is, in a community, this is the local food equivalent of the Declaration of Independence of 1776. And a community or a region taking such a stand will be just as incendiary as the Declaration of Independence, just as radical, just as revolutionary. And we can't emphasize this enough.
During stage 5, it becomes essential to consciously develop the local food supply chain, the heart of the regional foodshed.
So the focus in this stage is to catalyze an integrated, collaborative, values-based system to connect producers and food entrepreneurs with their larger commercial markets.
This means rebuilding the missing local food infrastructure of aggregation, storage, processing, distribution, and marketing in the form of a network of local food-related enterprises.
We've seen many efforts at rebuilding infrastructure attempt to get underway during stage 3 before there's really sufficient demand or supply.
Thus, these efforts are often doomed to failure. There aren't enough capital resources available to sustain them through stage 4.
Yeah. So then we go to stage 6. Hang on just a second here. Stage 6 of localizing a foodshed is to significantly expand the growing regional food system to ensure the long-term resilience of that foodshed.
If a local food system is to feed a significant portion of its population, reaching levels of 25% food localization or more, it'll be necessary to achieve a level of scale and efficiency far beyond what we're seeing almost anywhere in the U.S. today.
And we would say that this stage, stage 6, is unknown territory, where essentially nobody in the local food movement has gone before. And it may be decades away.
Yeah. Stage 7 is where evolution is ultimately taking the process, where we will have catalyzed a regional foodshed that is economically robust, environmentally sustainable, resilient, and self-reliant.
And that ensures food security and food sovereignty and food justice for all its people, that contributes to the health and happiness of our citizens, that revitalizes our local economies, and that regenerates our bioregion.
The foodshed that finally emerges is a living being, regenerative, itself capable of proliferating other similar living beings. This is what the local food revolution is all about.
This collective effort taking place in regions across the country and around the world ultimately ushers in the next phase of human evolution, what Thomas Berry has called the Ecozoic era.
Most emerging foodsheds are at late stage 3 or early stage 4, where it is becoming apparent that nothing will meet the urgent need but a local food revolution. That is, a radical expansion and acceleration of the local food movement in impact, effectiveness, and scale. But who will mobilize this local food revolution?
And here, perhaps, is the worst news of all. We can tell you that there is no one to mobilize this revolution but the people right here on this call, and the ones who should have been here. And we simply can't look to anyone else to do this. This falls to us.
If we can begin to see this and feel this, then we will realize that we have no choice but to rise up as a people and take back our food supply. But how?
How? The transition to a localized food and farming system, a regional foodshed, means that nearly every aspect of the way we feed our local population must be redesigned and rebuilt from the ground up.
Getting there will require the participation of a huge number of players.
Yeah.
Food entrepreneurs, farmers and ranchers, chefs and restaurateurs, retailers, grocery stores, wholesale distributors, policymakers, and on-the-ground activists.
But the general public of eaters, we the people, must lead the way in this local food revolution.
Local governments will need to be involved too, but at the right time and in the right way, in a supportive role, not a leadership role. That role falls to us.
As Alan Savory, one of the great elders of this movement, teaches so eloquently, government has no role in agriculture. It's the work of the people.
The problem is that today almost no one understands why localizing our food supply is necessary. This has all been hidden from us.
Yeah. So we need to heed the warning of climate scientist Peter Wadhams at the University of Cambridge, who says, sooner or later there will be an unbridgeable gulf between global food needs and our capacity to grow food in an unstable climate. Inevitably, he says, starvation will reduce the world's population.
Who will tell the people in your community that they must shift into emergency mode to build a highly localized regional food system, a living food shed? Who will sound the alarm?
Who will tell them about the devastating news from Dr. David Battisti and Dr. Irakli Loladze in Lincoln, Nebraska?
Who will show them how food localization can be done?
And who will be able to stand up against the inevitable denial?
This comes down to you, down to us here today. There is no one else to do this. But how?
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. We'd like to talk about the 7 keys to emerging as a leader of the local food revolution in your community.
But these 7 keys are not some kind of recipe. They are a map of a transformational journey that you must go through to emerge as a revolutionary food shed catalyst. This is a process that will take years to unfold in your life, even if you have already begun.
Yeah. The first stage of this process is about seeing and holding the vision of the highly localized food shed as humanity's only viable lifeboat through a time of darkness and chaos brought about by industrial civilization.
Here you come to see yourself as part of an evolutionary course correction, and you will begin to see the possibility of a truly regenerative revolution, beginning with food localization.
So the entire process, of course, begins with vision. You alone hold the vision for the regional food shed that is needed. This is where you begin.
The vision has come to you, not from you. And this is where the entire process starts.
The vision is being activated in you. You are the evolutionary catalyst, the initiator.
So you cultivate and nurture this vision as best you can, realizing that your initial grasp of the vision will grow and evolve over time.
And at first, you're just seeing the broad outlines of this vision, not the specifics. But the specifics will gradually become clear. This just takes time.
You are the vision keeper for the potential of food localization where you live. This is something like being given the tribe's sacred bundle, which must be protected and preserved for generations to come. Being the vision keeper is a sacred duty.
Healing and restoration begin with reconnecting. So in stage 2, you become part of the process of reweaving the web of connections at the heart of human community that have been torn asunder through the totalitarian agriculture that's been dominating our civilization.
Here you discover that our senses have been deadened by our industrialized culture and the so-called food it produces.
And when your senses begin to awaken and you experience the terroir of local food, you become witness to a landscape that you did not know existed, just down the road from where you live.
Here you discover that there are people who dedicate their lives to producing the most wholesome, the most nutrient-dense, the most health-generating and life-giving food available anywhere on the planet, and making it available to friends, neighbors, and members of their community.
If you visit a farm or a ranch where this is happening, you begin to discover a vast community of living beings that coexist in harmony with humans, from the biota of the soil to the symphony of living creatures, plant and animal, that are all part of this web of life. You simply didn't know that such collaboration and cooperation was even possible in today's world.
You also discover a community of people who are working together to make the abundant harvest of this labor, the fruits and vegetables and meats available to us.
And you discover that living among us, there is a growing community of eaters, people who thrive on local food and the experience it engenders.
You discover that you are being introduced to the world of the local food experience, and that you have stepped onto a path of discovery that has no end.
You're on your way to discovering, or perhaps rediscovering, a way of life that is so profound and so precious that you could call it a doorway to the sacred.
Well, this is the local food experience of which we speak in our work, knowing that most people who hear these words are often confused and even a little put off by them at first.
We're pointing to a living system, a living being that is emerging in our midst, rebuilding lost connections, rekindling true community in a time of separation and isolation. What is emerging through this process is a living food shed.
Experiencing this opens the way for us to become place-based, part of the natural community in the area where we live. We begin to actually experience the land and the cycles and processes of life that occur throughout the seasons.
We begin to connect with what we observe in the ebb and flow of weather that's happening on the farms and ranches that grow our food.
We gain a sense of the movement of moon and sun and stars, and feel how everything is orchestrated together, deeply interrelated.
This experience is really life transforming, and it will activate deep yearnings and motivations inside all of us.
Eventually, you will want to help connect others with this emergence of regenerative agrarian life.
Stage 3, as foodshed catalysts, we must know, we must understand what we're facing, the larger context in which our emerging foodshed is coming to birth, the realities of our current situation. Otherwise, we're flying blind.
We believe that Gus Speth is quite correct when he says that unless we know the full extent of our predicament, we will never do what is necessary.
Being in touch with unfolding realities informs the vision that moves us, and that vision will evolve accordingly.
There are two primary aspects of current reality that we must absorb and integrate.
The first is coming to grips with our fundamental predicament, that the dawning realization that we're now experiencing the early stages of the worst global catastrophe since the dinosaurs were wiped out some 66 million years ago, along with 70% of all other species of life.
The impact of our industrial civilization on the planet's biosphere has become so great that scientists now agree that humanity has become a destructive force of geologic scale, and that our activities in recent centuries are forcing the entire planet into a new planetary era, the Anthropocene epoch.
A term we'll hear more and more in the future, Anthropocene epoch, which is marked by a mass extinction of species, only the sixth in the Earth's 4.5 billion year history. So some 100 to 200 species are now disappearing every day.
Global warming is the primary engine of the Anthropocene, with greenhouse gas emissions, primarily CO2 and methane, driving up temperatures far more quickly than almost any climate model had predicted.
And the primary cause of this global disaster turns out to be industrial agriculture, the way humanity has organized to feed itself. In the last 100 years, the global industrial food system has become the largest and most destructive industry in the world, the primary contributor to global warming.
This industrial food system is destroying life on the planet, and it is killing us. Of all the people who die each year in the US and Europe, approximately half now die from food-related illnesses, a direct result of the industrial food system. The toxins, chemicals, hormones, and poisons in industrial food are unleashing an epidemic of disease unlike anything in human history.
Well, the so-called Green Revolution, which was the displacement of agrarianism in third world countries by industrial agriculture, while that caused a tremendous spike in human population to the point of population overshoot now, the backlash is coming due now as global warming causes the collapse of the industrial food system and triggers the collapse of human numbers on this planet as well.
The more deeply you understand this predicament, the more undeniably obvious it is that localizing the food supply is an urgent necessity in the face of unstoppable global crises.
And we have to say, if this was all we understood of current and future reality, there would be little basis for hope. We would have to conclude that the destruction of life on this planet and the extinction of the human species is just inevitable.
But
in
the next part of your journey, you begin to discover that this convergence of global catastrophe we call the Anthropocene epoch is actually the beginning of a profound evolutionary course correction now taking hold on this beleaguered Earth.
And once this sinks in, this will come as profoundly good news, that the completely unexpected other side of our collective predicament. But this is nearly impossible to know without some sense of how evolution and the process of healing and regeneration actually works.
Here you begin to see and feel how highly localized regional food sheds are the gateway to this evolutionary course correction process, and how you can play a crucial role in this great coordination.
We can only touch on this very briefly here, but part of what we discover is that this evolutionary course correction is a self-organizing, self-transforming, self-healing process.
It's progressive and directional, reflecting a greater force or organizing principle that is being expressed through its unfolding.
So food localization is right at the front lines of evolutionary course correction. And you, as a food shed catalyst, are in the early stages of preparing to become a vehicle for this evolutionary course correction.
When it all sinks in, you are poised for the next stage of the journey, the turning point for you.
If you're truly called to this work, what happens next for you is a process of radicalization. We've certainly experienced this in our own lives.
You reach the point where you know it truly does come down to you, that you have no choice but to accept responsibility for leading the local food revolution in your community, for becoming the vehicle for this evolutionary course correction.
And often those of us who see this and feel this feel almost completely alone. Because we now bear great responsibility to respond with the very best we have and the very most we have to give. This is it.
Here it sinks in that the next 5 to 10 years represents the most crucial moment in all of human history. This is the pivot point.
If we're successful during this time, perhaps no one will remember what we're about to do now. And if we're not successful, perhaps there will be no one left to remember.
It's not so much that you become willing to take enormous risks in order for your life to matter.
It's more that you realize that everything is at stake, and that together we could lose all that truly matters on this planet. So we're compelled to do everything we can to ensure that what is most important and most sacred about being human not only survives, but ultimately thrives.
Accepting this responsibility and following what most deeply motivates you is the nature of being a revolutionary foodshed catalyst.
And like those who initiated the American Revolution 240 years ago, you are now moved at a very deep level to, as they said, pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to the most important and most urgent cause of our time, the localization of our food supply, the building of resilient food security and sovereignty for us all, the reclamation of our future.
As this world plunges headlong into an age of Anthropocene darkness, we somehow know that out of the ashes of a dying civilization will emerge something new and unexpected.
And we know that that will arrive, for in our devotion and commitment, we have preserved the very conditions conducive to life and have prepared the soil, you could say, in which those precious seeds can be planted and at last bear fruit.
Having made this decision and commitment, having accepted your role as an emerging revolutionary foodshed catalyst, you don't just go out and plunge into projects or being organizing.
You have to first prepare yourself for this role in earnest. You're preparing for a lifetime of work. In a sense, you're starting over. Something's being initiated in you, and you are initiating a process in your community. And this is daunting.
Because no one has ever localized a regional food system before, certainly not at the levels of population that we are faced with these days. No one knows how to do this.
The local food revolution, we say, must first begin within yourself. You must become radicalized, internally revolutionized. This is a transformational process, and it takes time. You can't make this happen.
You must come to the place where you choose to yield to the evolutionary force that is moving within you. You choose this because you have no other choice.
So at stage 5, your first responsibility as a foodshed catalyst in training is to develop a plan. Not a plan for the localization of the food supply where you live, but a plan to prepare yourself for your own development as a revolutionary leader in the process.
You must prepare yourself physically, mentally, relationally, and spiritually. You must take on the discipline of becoming an evolutionary catalyst, which for you will be a lifelong process.
And we say in this planning process, be kind to yourself. Allow yourself sufficient time and a supportive environment to do this planning, preferably over a matter of months. Don't try to rush this part of the process.
Your developmental plan will be completely unique, and you are not obligated to share it with anyone else, at least in the early stages. It is not necessary for anyone else in your community to know that you're taking this journey.
And here in stage 6, we'll focus on just one aspect of implementing your plan, and that is to catalyze an initiating group in your community.
We've said earlier that you are the vision keeper for the potential of food localization where you live. However, the vision cannot manifest if you carry this sacred treasure alone.
You know, there are others in your community who are also called to this work just as you have been. And so it's your job to find them and to communicate this vision to them in a way that it activates them deeply.
This may take a long time, but eventually you will be able to assemble a very small group of people, no more than 8, including yourself, who are able to hold the same vision that you do, and together are willing to accept responsibility for its ultimate fulfillment.
And with these people, you will be entering into an adventure of collaborative co-creation.
It may be that you decide together that no one else need know of this group's existence, that this will be a secret group, true revolutionaries.
So it's important to know that you and your initiating group will never reach the point where your work is complete. You will never see the day when the food supply in your community is fully localized, for this will probably take generations to accomplish. You're merely initiating the process and serving as catalysts for food localization.
Your function is not to organize the food localization effort in your region, but to serve and support the process itself, and to serve and support those in whom the process is coming to life. This is a very different approach to leadership.
You and your initiating group are issuing a persistent call in your community, a consistent message, a vibrational frequency, you could say. Essentially, you are calling for a rebirth of agrarian, food-based culture and community.
The success of your initiating group cannot be measured by the percentage of food localization achieved in your region over a period of time.
In fact, we would suggest that your real success together can only be evaluated in terms of the capacities you have developed together to align with and express the evolutionary force of healing and regeneration, and what you've learned about working together as a united body of co-creators.
In other words, consider that what is most important about going through this process together is not what you accomplish, but what you become.
At times, what you're attempting here may seem utterly impossible, but that's kind of the realm of the evolutionary catalyst.
In an earlier global crisis, Winston Churchill is rumored to have said, "Leadership is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm." This is the kind of leadership you will come to embody.
As foodshed catalysts, we may fail 1,000 times before we ever experience a systemic success. And yet, this is precisely how evolution works, relentlessly seeking to emerge through countless transitional entities.
We ourselves are transitional entities.
Yeah.
And we must be willing to be used for this purpose.
We serve something greater than what can be measured or even visible in this lifetime.
You become part of the flow of evolution itself, and evolution is an unstoppable force.
So, learning to see food localization as an emergent process of healing and regeneration liberates you from the crushing enormity of what you face.
As we've said many times, what is ultimately at stake in this work is human freedom and sovereignty.
And once we understand this, we have no choice but to do everything we can to reclaim the future.
The destruction of the biosphere and degradation of our food supply must stop, no matter how long it takes, no matter the cost.
But now you know the full well that this effort can only be realized over a very long period of time.
You are initiating the mobilization that represents humanity rising to the most demanding occasion in history.
So while you're shaping the future of your food shed, it is also shaping you.
The rebuilding and the localization of a regional food shed is a massive process. No one can control this process, but you have the great privilege of being its catalyst and an ardent advocate for co-creative collaboration.
And no one can say whether this effort will ultimately be successful in your region. No one can say whether the emergence of a network of regional food sheds will occur in time to avert utter catastrophe.
But as an evolutionary catalyst, you know the evolutionary arc of the moral universe is relentless. Everything you contribute to this process is of great and lasting value.
As revolutionary food shed catalysts, we have the unique blessing and responsibility of being able to participate in Earth's redemption.
What we are initiating really is the reversal of the destruction of the last 10,000 years of industrial civilization. We are vehicles for healing and regeneration.
We're part of a vast coordination of lives towards a single aim, the ending of separation and the inauguration of the new civilization that will be the fulfillment of the dream of the earth.
As we proceed on the path of being a revolutionary food shed catalyst, working in co-creative collaboration with others who share our vision and commitment, we will inevitably face difficult challenges and obstacles.
Inevitably. You can certainly expect to come up against the challenges of lack of capital, lack of labor, lack of infrastructure, lack of land, lack of water. But these are actually the easy things to deal with. The greater challenges and obstacles are internal.
The first of these is the thought, who am I to do this?
For reasons that are beyond your comprehension, the universe has chosen you to pioneer the localization of the food supply in your community, to catalyze the emergence of a regional food shed.
Self-doubt is normal. But you must learn that ultimately you have no choice in the matter. You must accept that this has come to you and that you must do the best you can.
You can't walk away. Much depends on you, far more than you can now imagine.
The next challenge has to do with making premature and inappropriate commitments.
You know, most of us feel inclined to commit to people and to projects far earlier than is really appropriate. And this can derail us from the direction that the evolutionary force is taking us.
We must develop discernment and patience and learn to avoid giving ourselves away.
You are capable of developing the capacity to know where you must focus your efforts and your energies.
This requires listening intently to what is moving deep within you. Do not allow yourself to be misled by other persuasions.
The next one is a big one. It's overwhelm. The work of food localization is certainly complex and multi-layered, and it has to happen in the face of great urgency and great resistance, perhaps during periods of considerable chaos and even conflict. And in such an environment, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and inadequate.
And here we must remember that we are not alone in this endeavor, that we are joined not only by those in our initiating group, but also by countless others all over the world who are called to this work.
And we would submit that we are also mysteriously supported by invisible forces who seek to assist us in aligning ever more closely with the arrow of evolution itself.
Eventually, you'll be able to feel this and perhaps even experience moments of grace.
So if you find yourself in overwhelm, you must stop, long enough to recognize the fear and the doubt that are holding you back.
Recall that you have irrevocably chosen to give all that you are and do all that you can in service to this greater purpose.
And allow yourself time to reconnect to the deeper current that's flowing within you.
Drink from the well of wisdom and love that lies within your own heart. Summon your courage and return to work.
Perhaps the greatest challenge or obstacle that you will face is the sometimes inescapable sense that the effort to reclaim the future and take back our food sovereignty faces nothing less than insurmountable odds.
There's not enough money, not enough land, not enough labor, not enough support, and not enough time in which to get the job done before the curtain of human civilization falls. This can be paralyzing.
But here we must increasingly realize that we are one with this long arc of the moral universe, and that we carry the seeds of the future that the universe itself has been nurturing for eternity.
We have 13.8 billion years of evolution at our backs and the foundation of countless generations of ancestors to build upon.
We're not alone. We're not just an individual. And evolution will not fail. So ultimately, we will not fail.
There is one more external obstacle that we should also mention here: resistance and opposition.
So while food localization represents healing and regeneration emerging on this beautiful planet, there are forces who will resist and oppose these efforts.
Yeah. For instance, the minions of the unholy alliance are legion, and they will mobilize to sabotage, undermine, oppose, thwart, and stop you and your brothers and sisters from being successful.
And the unholy alliance has a seemingly bottomless war chest, and they're prepared for a very long siege. They're prepared to do anything they need to advance and protect their wealth and their power, and they won't tolerate anything or anyone who gets in their way.
But you are not at war with them. You seek their healing and restoration as well.
Right.
Remember, it is said that enemies are but friends who have not yet learned to join.
During the time of a dying civilization, which is where we find ourselves now, the effort to localize the food supply will appear dangerous and threatening to many who are committed to the economic and social status quo.
This is an expression of a deep fear that the foundations of society are crumbling, requiring a desperate attempt to shore them up.
So be loving and be patient with those who are caught up in all this drama, and hold yourself apart from that drama.
As evolutionary catalysts, we know where evolution is going, and we know that it is unstoppable.
We know that all obstacles and all resistance are really temporary and can't withstand the flow of healing and regeneration.
In this webinar, we've opened the door just a crack on the process of becoming a revolutionary catalyst and taking your place on the front lines of the local food revolution. As you process all of this, the questions will start flooding in.
Yeah, so we'll have a few minutes to deal with questions, but in the meantime, there are two ways that we can offer that you can move forward right now.
The first is to read our brand new book, published earlier this week, Reclaiming the Future: How to Lead the Local Food Revolution in Your Community. You'll receive a free PDF download of the book for participating in tonight's webinar. It's also available right now for free on Amazon.
This book, I would say, is just about as incendiary as Thomas Paine's famous common sense pamphlet was in 1776, and holds the keys to the future of our democracy.
The second way is to apply for our local food academy, which begins on March 5th.
This is a 12-week online boot camp, you could say, for emerging foodshed catalysts who want to radically accelerate and expand their effectiveness and their impact in their community. In other words, to take their place as leaders of the local food revolution. They complete a 12-week process with a solid plan for themselves and certification as a foodshed catalyst.
If your application to the Academy is compelling and you are truly called to this work, you'll be eligible for a free 1-hour strategy session with the two of us.
So these are the next steps that you can take to download and read the book or apply for the Academy.
Links to the new book and information about the Local Food Academy application will be emailed to you along with our contact information.
Meanwhile, we have time, I hope still, Don, for some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. We have a couple questions already, and I want to encourage anybody who has a question that I believe there's still time to type it into the chat, into the Q&A module. There's a little button at the bottom of your screen, or you can press the button to raise your hand, and we will turn on your video and audio so you can speak directly with Michael and Lynette Marie. We have a couple questions queued up already. The first is from, I think it's pronounced Trey English. He says, our strategy is to try to build community based on local food and demand for local food by coming together in community. What tools exist to get a bunch of co-located strangers, so-called neighbors, to want to come together?
To want to come together. Well, ultimately, it will be the impacts of global warming that will strongly encourage people to come together. But meanwhile, there are tools. I mean, so number one, you yourself are a tool. Trey, you can be the convener of such conversations in your community. And I would also say that our new book, Reclaiming the Future, is a tool that you can use. You know, we're not interested in selling books. That book is available for free on Amazon now. We're distributing it for free ourselves. This is a book that can help change the conversation about local food in your community.
Yeah. Great. All right.
Hi, Trey. It's great to hear from you.
All right. The next one is from David Cobb. And if I can get the chat to scroll up here. In the meantime, I'll just try to give a synopsis of it. Oh, okay, here it is. He works with Cooperation Humboldt in Northern California. He's wondering if folks believe it is important and or productive to engage the conversation that this work cannot be done within the economic system known as capitalism. Is the local food revolution and capitalism, are they mutually exclusive?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, so we're beginning within a capitalist economy, right? But just like we're not trying to fix the industrial food system, we're creating a parallel or alternate system. Mm-hmm. That's really what we're doing economically as well. You know, so we think that building a local food economy or changing the basis of our local or regional economies to food and agriculture will evolve a system that is very, very different from capitalism. Capitalism's fate could very well be the same fate that this particular civilization has. All civilizations have come to an end, and this one's just about there as well.
And what you're talking about, Michael, is really large-scale thinking. That,
Yeah.
David, that's how I envision this. And sometimes it's important to start where you live, working with a small group of people just to take care of that group, just to take care of yourself and the people that you interact with and care about.
So we don't need to deal with the question of capitalism immediately.
Right.
What we need to do is build our local food system. That's the most important priority.
Yeah. And it's still a good question to think about.
It's very important to think about. So we'd recommend Charles Eisenstein's book, Sacred Economics.
Right.
Great. All right. Thank you all for your great questions. Kate Waddick had a couple questions. One is social permaculture and permaculture for children have been a big topic. How do we support mothers' rights? And a somewhat related topic is, what ways have you identified to support intercultural initiatives?
Okay.
Two really good questions.
Two good? Yes, two good questions. The important piece to always hold, it's essential to understand that we all need to be eating healthy, nutritious food. All of us. It helps us come together in community and support one another to be able to share sustenance. By doing that, it takes us beyond the question or even the argument of who fits and who doesn't fit. The thing is, we are humanity. We are essential to caring for the earth, all of us.
And we really are all in the same boat when it comes to food insecurity. We are all food insecure in this modern society, to the extent that we depend upon the global industrial food system. So this is as grassroots, as leveling an effort as there could ever be, really. And when we realize as communities that we really are in an emergency situation given our food supply, then these barriers that have been artificially held up in this capitalistic society will begin to dissolve very rapidly.
Great. Yeah, I just want to put something out there for anybody who might be particularly interested in this topic. Transition US is currently planning a 4-day movement strategy session to take place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this summer, specifically around bringing together community resilience building initiatives such as the local food movement and social, economic, racial justice movements. So if anyone is interested in that particular topic and helping to organize this event, you can get in touch with me, Don at transitionus.org, and I'll be sending you an email after this.
That's great.
We do have a few more questions.
Sure.
All right, so Jean Kavanaugh writes that her question is related to David's, the one about the capitalist economic system. She says, we are a family of 4. How are the economic needs of our individual family met while sharing the land and that which we produce with our community, especially reparations to those who have been wronged?
Tough question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's coming up for me at the moment is the wrongs that have been charted in the evolution of this country since the American Revolution 240 years ago have been pretty profound. This country has been, and our economy has been built on the backs of slavery. It's been built on the decimation of our native peoples, and the wounds are very, very great. And we think that what we will discover is that the way to healing those wounds is when we realize, number one, that we have all been wounded by the industrial food supply. We have all been colonized by that system. And it's not just 99.3% of our food supply that's been colonized. To a great degree, our minds and our psyches have been colonized as well. Coming together as communities to build resilient food systems that serve everyone in that community is the pathway for healing and restoration and regeneration. We don't see any other pathway but this one.
Okay, so I think we have about time for two more questions, and I have one from screen name is Bowen Island, and then one from Andrea Wisner, and I think that's about all the time we're going to have.
Okay.
But you can follow up with Michael and Lynette Marie after this. The one from Bowen Island is one that I was kind of expecting somebody to ask. It was a question I had on my mind too. Which I think will be great to address. How do you put together going slow enough in this process with your statement that we have to do this in the next 5 years?
Every day we're wrestling with that question. Yeah, because the temptation is very great to just make this happen and try our best to make it happen. And what inevitably results from that is just more of the same predicament that we've gotten ourselves into. So this is the tightrope that the evolutionary foodshed catalyst must learn to deal with every single day. The urgency of the situation and the necessity of growing this in the most organic, most grounded way possible.
I think it's also very important that people take time out to really listen to nature, to listen to the earth. What do you hear? What do you know? And share that with one another, because there is guidance on a very deep level.
Yeah.
And it's important to be with that, to know that what are the steps to move us in this direction. And then once that's completed at that point for a particular stage, then action can be applied.
We just, last week, we had our very first foodshed catalyst convergence for people involved in the local food academy, 3 days here in Boulder. And a key part of the whole discussion there was self-care for foodshed catalysts. As we go through this, we have to be able to sustain for a very long time. And so part of the process of learning how to hold that tension in a responsible way is to learn how to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and as somebody who's wrestled with this question a bit over the years, I think it can be like the tortoise and the hare, to put it in a really simple way.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, that if we are able to sense where we are going to have the most impact, the most
Yeah,
leverage on
that's right.
transforming our local food system,
That's right.
even though it takes us some time and preparation to find that and to sense into that,
Yeah, yeah.
we may actually end up making a bigger impact in the time that we have than if we just run around like the proverbial chicken with the head cut off.
And at the same time, you know, as we've often said, if you see that the river going through your town is rising and it's going to keep rising, you immediately go down and start piling up sandbags. You know, you don't equivocate. You don't even try to draft other people. You just go to work and do it, because that is the urgent need of the moment. And hopefully we won't have to do too much of that kind of work.
Okay, one more question and then we'll wrap up. And I do want to say, for people who are asking about materials and links, that I will be sending a follow-up email shortly after this webinar, if not later today, then tomorrow. So you will get a bunch of resources in that. But one last question. Andrea Wisner asked, I have a general question about what legal support exists for this system. My concern is that capitalism will outlaw these small-scale attempts. Trump loves eminent domain, i.e. taking away other people's land.
I don't know what lawyers do during a revolution. I haven't thought about that. That's a really interesting question. But we know some really revolutionary lawyers who are beginning to emerge these days. And you know, in the time of revolution, historically, it's like all the laws, all the rules and regulations are out the window, you know, because everything is at stake. And I'll just say that here in Boulder County, in Colorado, we have been facing a really oppressive legal and regulatory environment in this county that really holds the local food movement back. And our farmers and ranchers here are really struggling as a result of that. And they have finally, after, you know, we've been working this for 12, 13 years here, but they finally, just in the last few months, reached the point where if the local government doesn't respond and begin meeting their real needs in a significant way, they are on the edge of open revolt. And it changes things, you know. So part of what we think about in the Local Food Academy is, what does radicalization of my effort and my commitment actually look like? And we need to take this, we need to think this through so that we're prepared, should the time come, to take truly radical action. But there probably won't be many lawyers around.
I think in the meantime, to point out, because Andrea also asked this, Sustainable Economies Law Center out of the Bay Area in California, Janelle Orsi, would be a good one to look up. And also the community rights movement. We did some work with Paul Cienfuegos last year, and there's some recordings on our website of Paul talking about the community rights movement.
And we also have some pretty available lawyers here in Boulder County that have been working specifically on building cooperatives, you know, co-creative endeavors. And I can't think of their name right at the moment, but I'd be happy to share some of those folks and their skills.
Fortunately, there are attorneys these days who are deeply called by exactly the same
Same things,
issues.
right.
And they have been learning everything that they can in order to be of real assistance to this revolutionary effort that's needed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank goodness.
We're all needed.
We're all needed.
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Michael and Lynette Marie. And thank you, everybody who's joined us on this call. We do a thing at the end of these webinars where we promote everybody to panelists so we can see your video and you can say goodbye, any words of thanks, hang out for a little bit if you want to.
Great. This is so hard in this artificial digital environment. We'd rather be sitting around in somebody's living room talking with each other. You know?
But before I do that, I'm just going to stop the live stream on Facebook, say goodbye to our friends on Facebook, and stop the recording of this. And also, yeah, let you know that I am going to be sending a follow-up email to participants, and that will include resources as well as a short survey, which would be great if everybody would fill out. It just takes a minute and lets us know how we can continue to improve these offerings. So goodbye to everybody in Facebook land.
Yeah.
And we are going to stop